The Lamp and Light Mennonite community is a quiet and peaceful place. It's a place 27-year-old Sasha Kraus calls home. It's also a place bound by strict religious rules. No kissing before marriage, no access to the internet, and a dress code.
What's really obvious in our culture and what people see is like the way a conservative Mennonite dresses. Like a woman wearing a covering on her head. And women are gonna wear dresses because that is considered more modest and more feminine.
Sasha may dress modestly, but she isn't afraid to take a bite out of life. That's why she loves the Lamp and Light. She's living on her own for the first time, working at a religious publishing house, learning new things every day. And she's thriving. But one night, after dinner, Sasha goes out for just a minute and never comes back.
This isn't like her. She doesn't have a pattern of disappearing. So for her to not come home means something is wrong.
Take one.
I'm Bree Burkett. I covered the disappearance of Sasha Kraus for the Arizona Republic, as well as the Arizona Daily Sun. It was a Saturday. Sasha was planning to teach Sunday school the next day. So she left her apartment where she lived with her roommates, got in her car, and drove down to the church. Wasn't that far, very close. She had to retrieve some materials.
As per the rules, Sasha knows never to miss her 9 p.m. curfew. So when her roommates discover that she's still not home at 1 a.m., they wake up the rest of the community, grab their flashlights, and start searching everywhere for her.
I just woke up and I said, "Where is Sasha? I'm scared."
And I imagine that was probably terrifying. Here's this girl you live with, you think is just going down the street, and then she doesn't come home.
We just headed down to the church house just as quick as we could.
Things like this don't happen here. Until now. After 4 hours of searching, the community breaks down and contacts the San Juan Sheriff's Office.
My name is Stephen Strang. At the time of the Sasha Kraus case, I was in the detectives division and I was assigned to this case as the lead investigator.
Detective Strang is a 5-year veteran of the force, but this call is different. For him, this is new territory.
I had never been there. Not one time, not one call. For us to be contacted, that is not something that they would normally do.
Mennonites prefer to handle their own matters and avoid involving mainstream authorities. And because this situation is so unusual, the county sheriff is overseeing the case.
My name is Shane Ferrari. I'm sheriff of San Juan County, New Mexico, and we were the agency that took the initial report on Sasha Kraus being missing. When we have somebody that's missing, the first question is, did they voluntarily leave, or did they leave because maybe somebody abducted them?
Sasha's roommates tell the detectives that the last time they saw her was after dinner. She told them she was driving down to the church, literally just a few hundred feet from her living quarters.
Her vehicle was still there at church. The parking lot was gravel, so we didn't find any disturbance in the ground. Looks like somebody was maybe drugged from the vehicle.
I opened the vehicle up to look at it. Between the rocker panel and the seat, we find the keys for the vehicle. So that was the very first indicator to me that something is wrong.
The detectives now start looking for signs that Sasha was taken against her will.
I go into the church trying to find, are there any signs of struggle, any signs of foul play? There was no blood, no nothing, no pulled hair on the ground, no anything. It made it appear as though she went willingly.
What Detective Strang doesn't yet know is that if Sasha was attacked, she might never have fought back. Mennonite practices vary from community to community, but one thing is constant: their strong belief in non-resistance, which means they live a violence-free life, close to the land, and are kind to each other. That's partly what attracted Sasha's family to this way of life in the first place. Sasha isn't born a Mennonite. Her family converts when she is 12 years old. Chester Weaver knew Sasha's family then.
Chester Weaver, take one marker.
My name is Chester C. Weaver, Jr. Most people who come just for culture are here with us for a while and then they leave. But people who come for the deeper matters are the ones like Krause's who stay. We're not Roman Catholic, we're not Protestant, we're a third way. It has to do with humility and quietness of heart and forgiveness.
Sasha comes to the Lamp and Light in 2018 from Texas to work at their in-house publishing company, writing and editing Bible pamphlets. And in her spare time, she writes poems and songs.
Sasha had her own personality, and she knew what she was doing. She had such depth in her creative writing. And you could tell that she was writing out of something within her.
The first thing you hear is Mennonite, but quickly digging into it, there was a lot more to her than just that label. She spoke 3 languages. She was very artistic. She lived with roommates. She had a job. She was driving. She was very independent. I mean, if you ignore the dress, she's just like any other woman in her late 20s.
As the hours pass and there's still no sign of Sasha, investigators wonder if this worldly young woman decided she wanted to return to a less restrictive way of life.
The thought process came to me that maybe she just wanted to leave this lifestyle.
Maybe Sasha was curious about what it would be like working in the city, going for drinks, swiping right.
So some of the questions that we had for ourselves were, was she contacting somebody via the internet? Maybe she was possibly involved in a relationship or communication with somebody else.
But the detective soon learned from her roommates that in keeping with Mennonite practices, the girls aren't on the internet.
We've become accustomed to looking for a digital footprint. People's social media, people's internet history, people's cell phones, who do they call, who do they text? And that is something that wasn't at our disposal at that time.
The detectives search Sasha's room and find her purse and her bank card. If she was planning on leaving, she would have at least taken her bank card, right? And why sneak off in the middle of the night?
We could not find it. We couldn't find a letter that said, meet me in Seattle. You know, we couldn't find anything that led us down the road to say that she was planning this. The more we learned, it was evident that something foul had happened.
8 hours after Sasha goes missing, the investigators call Sasha's parents to let them know what's going on. They're understandably upset and confused, but the police have no answers for them. They don't know where to start. Her roommates say there's no lover in her life, and there's no digital footprint to track. But then, while re-entering one of Sasha's roommates, a surprise revelation. It turns out Sasha isn't totally disconnected.
So you think when she ran to the church, she would have turned her car off and taken the keys into the church with her?
Right.
Okay.
Actually, if she would have left anything in her car, it would have been her phone.
We learned that Sasha had a phone, a cell phone, but it was not accounted for.
She was not the type of person to always have her phone on. Like, she uses it when she needs it, but barely that.
We had a small breadcrumb, if you will. We immediately started tracking that phone.
The detectives learned that while it's unusual for Mennonites to interact with outsiders, cell phones aren't forbidden. Lucinda Kinzinger views her phone as an essential tool, just like Sasha does.
I would call myself a conservative Mennonite. Or a plain Mennonite. My husband and I have a small farm. My husband and I We both have smartphones. We use them all the time. You know, I have recipes, I have pictures, I do emails, whatever on my phone. It's a tool. Some conservative Mennonites would draw the line there. They would be like, you know, cell phones are fine, but we don't want to go to the smartphones. We don't want to allow the internet. It's something that Mennonite churches are dealing with right now, and maybe how to keep their values when there's this inundation of information and influence from the World Wide Web.
Sasha uses a simple flip phone. It's all she needs to maintain her connection to the wider world. It will take time to access Sasha's phone records. In the meantime, the detectives start knocking on doors.
This is a very small community. Everyone recognizes everyone. And someone had recognized Sasha's boss. They recognized his car parked outside of the church in about the same time frame Sasha was believed to have been in there.
Sasha's boss at Lamp and Light is quite a bit older than she is. His name is Sam Kuhn.
He was said to have been there at 7:50. His van was seen there. His van was also seen there with the rear hatch open.
Her roommates tell detectives that Mr. Kuhn favored Sasha above the rest of them.
And so when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this sounds interesting.
Sam admits he was at the church where Sasha went missing at the exact same time.
Tell me what you remember about last night.
Okay, last night we left my home, my wife and I. We took the minivan over to pick up a water cooler. We went in. My wife said it was about 10 minutes to 8.
Did you see Sasha's car?
I remember nothing about seeing Sasha's car.
Oh, okay.
I found it very odd that that time frame was so close, yet there was no interaction.
Are you usually forgetful?
It depends on the area. Some details my wife takes care of, and I put my mind in neutral.
He is very, very intelligent, very direct, and at the same token, very closed off.
So you didn't go back to the church at all that evening?
That evening we did not.
Okay. So you didn't take Sasha?
No.
You didn't hide Sasha?
No.
You didn't kill Sasha? So what would you say to dissuade me from that thought?
That I'm not responsible?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. You'll have to examine the evidence.
You're not even going to say anything to defend your...
No.
How come?
Well, you know as well as I do. The evidence speaks for itself.
When the investigators leave the room, they notice something odd. He starts to cry. Are these tears of sympathy or the tears of a guilty man? Or maybe it's because he just got caught. The Lamp and Light Mennonite community is devastated when Sasha Krause doesn't return from a quick trip to pick up Bible materials. The detectives think that Sasha may know her abductor and are suspicious when Sasha's boss, Sam Kuhn, breaks down in tears.
She was not from a Mennonite background. And I wasn't exactly either.
I could tell that you're very emotional about this.
I've been away quite a bit to nothing. Yeah.
I understand that, and I appreciate it. Was there something more with you and Sasha?
Detectives remain suspicious of Kuhn, but without further evidence, they can't hold him. And with every passing hour, the odds of finding Sasha alive get smaller and smaller.
We're, at this time, still nonstop. And when I say nonstop, I mean little to no sleep, exhaustive effort. Time is critical. And I'm like, okay, there has to be something.
4 days after Sasha goes missing, her parents arrive from Texas, and they're desperate for answers.
So I had several conversations with Bob Kraus, Sasha's father. He's trying to process it in his own mind, his own way. What's going on? Why is this happening?
If you were a parent, you pray for your daughter's grace, that she would have the strength, she would have the protection. Bob told me himself, we just prayed.
The Mennonite people are very respected in our community, so I think everybody in San Juan County was very concerned that we had a predator at large in our community.
Although the community is respected in San Juan, Mennonites have suffered persecution for centuries because their beliefs don't fit into mainstream culture. But this is different. This feels personal.
I remember praying for Sasha in our prayer circle at church. I felt like this happened to her. You know, this could happen to me or someone like me too.
The only lead investigators have is Sasha's missing phone, and they're hoping it will help them locate her. 8 days after Sasha goes missing, her phone records are finally released.
You'll hear people refer to as a ping. People will tell you, oh, they're going to ping my phone. Well, basically what that means is in some circumstances, we can utilize a location service on a phone to show an approximate area, at least, of where it may be. And so I get down to the last pages of the report and I find a set of numbers that are completely off. And I'm like, okay, well, what is this?
These numbers are coordinates, which shows Sasha's phone traveling 50 miles west of Lamp and Light into a remote area of Arizona. How did she end up there? Even for a young woman as curious about the world as Sasha, it just doesn't make sense.
You are what people would say in the middle of nowhere. It is at least 100 square miles of reasonable search area. I don't have anything else in that area to indicate to me possibly where she may be. And I'm thinking to myself, where do you start?
Are you trying to kill? Are you trying to kill me?
At this point in time in the investigation, the reality has surfaced that we're likely not going to find Sasha alive. And as much as you want to hold out hope, you know that this is likely not going to have a good outcome.
Days turn into more than a month, and with no movement on the case, it seems like no one will ever know the fate of Sasha Kraus. Then, a chilling discovery.
We received a phone call from Coconino County. We may very well have found Sasha.
A hiker has found a body that fits Sasha's description.
If you're just willing to write a statement for me of what you saw and how this happened.
I can't go anywhere. I mean, at this point, what I'll probably do, I think, is I'm going to go down to Sedona after this and see my friend.
Okay.
Because I don't want to be alone.
But it's 250 miles away from where she was last seen in a completely different state.
So where is she? Straight ahead.
If this is Sasha's body, then investigators have been looking in the wrong places for weeks. What else have they been wrong about? One month after Sasha Kraus goes missing from her Mennonite compound in Farmington, New Mexico, a body is found on the top of Sunset Crater National Park, just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona.
I got a phone call. The detective on the phone described finding a body. My name is Ammon Barker. I'm currently the Chief Deputy County Attorney. I was one of the senior trial attorneys during the case.
Barker.
They were not sure who it was at the time. They described it to me as a young woman in a prairie dress, is what you might call it, and thought at first it might have been a sexual assault. Her underwear is missing at the time her body was recovered, and that's unusual.
As soon as Detective Strang hears about the discovery, he and his team raced to Flagstaff.
I was kind of like, is this for real? This is really happening? I mean, it's been a month.
When they arrive at the crime scene, the Coconino County homicide detective rolls the body over and reveals the woman's face.
An autopsy has confirmed that the body found in Arizona is that of a local missing Mennonite woman. San Juan County Sheriff's deputies say they are now turning this case into a murder investigation.
While the Farmington community notifies Sasha's parents of the grim discovery, the investigators parse the evidence.
She had her hands bound together with duct tape in front of her by the wrists. The medical examiner performed an autopsy on her body and found that she suffered blunt force trauma to the back of her head, as well as a gunshot injury to the back of her head.
Why would anyone want to murder Sasha? And how did she end up so far from home near this sleepy mountain town? The news rocks the whole community.
Murders are very rare in Flagstaff. And to have a murder happen, I think, was both shocking and disturbing to a lot of people. My name is Levi Stallings, and I was the videographer for the murder trial of Sasha Kraus. Somebody who kills somebody like Sasha, I can only see as an extremely evil individual.
Strangely, the medical examiner can't find evidence of sexual assault, despite her missing underwear. What could be the motive for such a crime?
When we didn't find any evidence of a sexual abuse, where's the crime of opportunity? There's not one. Why would you take someone that far? Why? Because people don't want to get caught.
Detective Strang and his team bring Sam Kuhn, Sasha's boss, back in for questioning. Last time they spoke with him, he broke down crying, raising the obvious question. Did he have an inappropriate relationship with his brilliant young protege?
No reason that your phone would show in the area of Flagstaff on those nights, right? The night that she went missing, there's absolutely no reason that your phone would show in Arizona.
No, absolutely not. I don't even know that I'd been in Flagstaff before we were. I'm quite sure I haven't. I don't.
Detectives don't buy his story, so they check his cell phone records. They're surprised to learn that he's telling the truth.
That data showed that Sam Kuhn was traveling in a different direction. It actually corroborated his account about where he was that night and gave him an alibi, and that was irrefutable.
Now that Kuhn is no longer a suspect, the investigators start listening more closely to his theories.
I don't understand the mind of a perpetrator, but was there a grudge? I don't know.
Who would have a grudge against her?
But what I was trying to find out right now was if there were a prisoner in the local prison.
Kuhn explains that since Sasha enjoyed writing, she spent hours each day reaching out to people in disenfranchised communities. And some of those people were inmates.
One thing that we learned is one of Sasha's duties was an outreach program that was done from the Mennonite community to the prison system. We considered the fact that what if this was someone in that system that wanted to harm her?
The San Juan Detention Center is less than 4 miles from Lamp and Light, and it houses thousands of possible suspects. Did one of them become obsessed with Sasha and upon release, steal her away in the middle of the night?
And so we found all of these letters within her room. We don't find anything in those letters that sends us down the road that there has been someone from the prison system who would wish to do harm. So again, now we're dead-ended again, and we're like, okay, where else, what other possibilities could come into play here?
The detectives go back to the cell phone tower logs thinking that maybe they missed something. They analyze the cell towers all along Sasha's known route and, miraculously, discover one other phone pinging in tandem until her phone goes dead.
I remember getting the phone call from detectives, and they said, Sheriff, we got all the tower dumps back. We went through all the data, and there's one number that matches.
The matching number is traveling at the same rate and the same time as Sasha's cell phone. This means someone was with her. Investigators tracked the number to a 21-year-old Air Force mechanic named Mark Gooch.
Mark Gooch was enlisted in the Air Force. He was stationed within Phoenix.
Detective Strang's team joins forces with the Flagstaff PD and travels to the Air Force Base to question the airman.
And he at first believes that he's being called in because he was speeding on his bike, on his motorcycle.
Well, thank you for your service, first of all. I did not serve in the military myself, so I really admire people who choose to do that.
Well, I'd serve my country.
To detectives, Mark just doesn't fit the profile of a predator.
People enlisted in the military take an oath, the same way law enforcement does, and Mark had dedicated his life to serving for the betterment of the community and country.
But then he tells them something that takes them by surprise.
If you don't mind me asking, what kind of religion did you grow up in?
Mainly, they would call Mennonites. Or Amish. I'm not sure how.
Oh,
they were, but
are you still Mennonite? I don't really know how to word that.
I still wish to attend the church. I just didn't really want to become a part of it.
Oh, okay. I got you. So you may have the same beliefs or faith, but you don't necessarily practice like the lifestyle.
Correct. The lifestyle is a bit too restrictive.
It seems like a big coincidence that both Sasha and Mark are Mennonite. But Mark claims he hasn't traveled out of state in the last 6 months.
There was a girl named Sasha Krause that was killed. Did you hear about that case?
I've seen it in the news. Yes, ma'am.
Right. So that's the case that I'm working. Any idea now why I'd want to talk to you at all?
Probably because I was traveling up in the New Mexico area, probably.
I'm a little confused because at first you said you hadn't traveled, but now, did you go to New Mexico?
No, I'm sorry. My memory just, I don't know, it's not what it used to be. I'm tired today.
Did he just make an innocent mistake? Is there a simple explanation for their overlapping cell phone data? Or is he lying through his teeth? "21-year-old Mark Gooch is being questioned in the murder of Sasha Krause, a brilliant member of the Farmington Mennonite community. The detectives have just learned that Mark is also a Mennonite who left the church for reasons unknown.
The Mennonite faith is built on this foundation of pacifism, but when Mark Gooch turned 18, he opted to leave the faith and pretty much go to the opposite end of the spectrum by enlisting in the Air Force.
Initially, he said he wasn't in the Farmington area the night Sasha went missing, but the detectives know that's not true because his cell phone was pinging alongside Sasha's until her phone went dead.
So why were you in New Mexico that day?
I was checking out Mennonite churches, and I made it up to the Mennonite church, and they didn't have their, trying to remember, do they have a Saturday evening service there?
I don't know, actually.
Unfortunately, they didn't have a Saturday evening service, so I couldn't attend that. So I figured I would head back, go hiking the next day.
So you said you're getting home at 8 or 9 p.m. on Saturday night.
Correct.
Right. Okay, cool. And just something to remember, since you live here on Luke Air Force Base, of course, you go in and out of a security gate.
Yes.
There's cameras all over the base.
Law enforcement pulled the surveillance footage from the base, and they spotted Mark arriving early in the morning the day after Sasha had been abducted.
So what if I told you that the time that you came in the gate that morning was 6:53 in the morning?
whatnot. Guess it was that late.
That's a long time.
Yes, ma'am.
You saying that you came home at even 2 in the morning compared to almost 7 in the morning, that's almost 5 hour difference.
So it sounds like I need to get a lawyer because you're trying to pin something on me.
This is all investigators need to hear to believe that Mark killed Sasha. They arrest him on the spot. But they won't be able to hold him for long if they can't figure out why this young man with a promising military career would target a Mennonite girl 250 miles away.
Once investigators really zeroed in on Mark Gooch, they did everything they could to learn about him.
Mark's military commander leads them to his best friend on the base, Alex Golub.
So when I first met him, I remember the first day I saw him at basic training. I was the 3rd bed, and he was across at the 1st bed, and I saw him and I was like, oh, this guy's like pretty scary looking, right? Just because he was a little off.
When you just said you thought he looked scary, what do you mean?
Just stiff as a board, body language. He wasn't relaxed. He was like at attention all the time. He'd always be like for everything, just like, yes sir, like, no ma'am. But as time went on, we just kind of labeled it as, that's just Gooch. You know, he was raised on a farm. His social skills weren't the best.
Okay. Did he seem to talk about his family a lot?
Not his family, but he'd always talk about his cop brother.
Alex says that Mark has 3 brothers, and even though they don't live in the same area, they're close. They text all the time.
They did subpoena his cell phone records, including his text messages. And within those text messages, they found him having conversations, particularly with 2 of his brothers, that very quickly indicated a strong hate for people within the Mennonite faith. One of his brothers was a Virginia state trooper, and he texted Mark about pulling over a Mennonite family on their way to a wedding. And this was during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mark Gooch seemingly relished in suffering of Mennonites, even Mennonites he did not know.
The text messages indicate that Mark had been surveilling Mennonites in the Phoenix area for months.
He was using terminology like, I'm on servo, which is surveillance. Why would you do that, and what are you planning?
The investigators are now convinced that Mark targeted Sasha because of her religion. But just because they believe that doesn't mean they can prove it. Mark has no history of violence, and there's no obvious reason he's targeting Mennonites.
We did not find any DNA in this case. We know that Sasha was killed with a .22 caliber gun because the medical examiner's office found a .22 caliber round lodged in her head, near her neck. And it wasn't until later that police found that Mark Gooch had taken his .22 caliber rifle to a friend that lived off base to hold that weapon for him.
When they track down his rifle, they're one step closer to finding the truth of what happened to Sasha.
Tonight, ballistics confirmed that the bullet pulled from Sasha's body was from Gooch's gun.
Now, the police think they have all the pieces of the puzzle. For some inexplicable reason, Mark Gooch had been prowling the Four Corners for months, searching for a Mennonite person to kill.
I think Mark Gooch was building to this point. There was a deep burning hatred. I'm convinced of that.
After months of hunting, he happens on the perfect opportunity. A young woman alone, in the dark, outside an empty church. He approaches her, asking if there might be a Saturday night service he could attend. Just one Mennonite talking to another.
He would know how to speak to someone. He would know how to dress appropriately to not come off offensive.
Mark Gooch was laying in wait and found an opportunity. He decided to act on it at that moment.
Once he's close enough, Mark overpowers Sasha, binds her hands, and throws her into the back seat of the car.
I have to imagine that Sasha's faith certainly helped her get through what must have been an extremely frightening moment. At some point, bashed her head so hard that it caused skull fractures.
He drives west looking for a place to kill her. But then from the backseat, a phone rings. This isn't part of the plan. He didn't think Sasha would have a phone given Mennonite beliefs about technology. But it doesn't stop him.
They went to the national park, in my mind, because that was what was convenient at the time. That was a necessity to not get caught.
I can't imagine what she was going through, what that must have felt like for her to be taken by a stranger and marched to a location where she was eventually shot in the back of the head.
With the murder weapon in hand and Sasha's cell phone pings, investigators hope it's enough to convince a jury. But Mark is going to fight them to the bitter end.
Mark Gooch has pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder.
No one saw Mark Gooch at the church area. No one saw Mark Gooch at or near Sasha Krause's car. Nobody saw Mark Gooch's car at any time.
Could he get away with this? On September 24th, 2021, Mark Gooch goes on trial for the kidnapping and first-degree murder of Sasha Krause. Mennonites from across the country come to witness the trial.
At the time, it was my biggest gig as a videographer. The courtroom was very calm, but also there was such a sense of sadness in a big room that I don't think I've personally seen outside of a funeral.
Without a confession, the prosecution needs to convince all 12 jurors that Mark is guilty using only circumstantial evidence.
People want DNA, they watch the TV shows, but we didn't have that forensic evidence that people want to see.
At the surface, he might have thought it was the perfect crime, you know?
The prosecution has one hope at proving Mark's guilt. The fact that his cell phone and Sasha's phone were moving at the same rate, in the same direction, and at the same time the night she disappeared.
How many devices were hitting off those towers at that time?
There's only one device that hits all three of those locations and corresponds with those time periods.
And once Sasha's phone goes dead, Mark Gooch's phone tracks to 1.37 miles from where her body is found.
It passes Sunset Crater. We see it out there at 103. And then it turns around and it comes back to the east. And we see it, the last time we see it is at 113, east of Sunset Crater.
The evidence is convincing, but will the jury agree? Then, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury finds Mark guilty. And it's Sasha's cell phone pings that helped catch her killer. If Sasha hadn't been so curious about life, so willing to keep one foot in the mainstream world, she wouldn't have had that phone at all.
I can't get inside of Mark Gooch's head, and nobody else can. In my subjective view, this was a religious hate crime.
He felt by targeting somebody as precious as Sasha, that in some way he was getting revenge or some type of vindication off of his experiences with the Mennonite community when he was younger.
In an act of supreme forgiveness, Sasha's parents asked the judge to take the death sentence off the table, and Gooch is sentenced to life in prison.
That's another aspect of forgiveness, is to realize that justice will be done. You know, there is not evil that will be let loose without being rectified, because God hates to see people hurt. And if we get angry when we see injustice, we get that from our Creator, you know? But I cannot rectify wrong by choosing wrong.
Certainly, this case wouldn't have been resolved the way it did without that cell phone data. If Sasha didn't have that cell phone with her at the time she was abducted, I'm not sure we'd ever find out who did this.
I don't know where my head is lately. Have I lost my mind?
There is a profound and deeply unsettling contrast that exists within places of extreme natural beauty, a duality that often masks the darker realities of an isolated landscape. When we picture a remote tropical island, our minds naturally and eagerly gravitate toward images of absolute serenity, of sun-drenched shores, gentle breezes, and an idyllic existence far removed from the complex anxieties of the modern, industrialized world. American Samoa, a breathtakingly stunning archipelago situated deep in the heart of the vast South Pacific Ocean, embodies this exact picturesque image for the vast majority of those who merely glance at a map or admire a travel photograph. Yet, beneath the vibrant, pulsating canopy of its incredibly lush rainforests and beyond the rhythmic, mesmerizing crash of its azure coastal waves, there lies a history marked by profound and terrifying shadows. The island of Tutuila, which serves as the largest, most prominent, and most populous of the territory, holds within its rugged, unforgiving topography a deeply disturbing mystery that has relentlessly haunted the local consciousness for decades. In exploring this narrative, our attention is drawn entirely away from the relatively bustling centers of island life and commerce. Instead, we are compelled to look toward the isolated, wild, and incredibly untamed western shores. The western coast of Tutuila is a geographical boundary where the land fiercely and violently meets the immense power of the ocean. It is characterized almost entirely by steep, dramatic, and treacherous cliffs that plunge directly and vertically into the churning, unpredictable waters below. It is an environment that demands immense respect from anyone who approaches it, a landscape that is undeniably beautiful but inherently, undeniably dangerous. Here, the specific coastal areas and beaches of Leon and Amanave stretch out in a state of pristine, almost aggressive isolation. Their sands and rocky outcrops remain largely untouched by the heavy footfall of external tourism, offering a profound solitude that is simultaneously breathtaking in its majesty and deeply, inherently isolating for anyone who finds themselves walking those shores alone. This profound sense of isolation is heavily amplified by the severe geography that immediately surrounds these coastal stretches. The paths leading toward and traversing the areas around the western beaches are by no means gentle, well-manicured, or easily navigable walkways. Rather, they are narrow, ancient, and deeply entrenched trails that wind their way erratically through a dense, aggressive, and almost completely impenetrable tropical rainforest. The natural vegetation here is overwhelmingly thick, functioning as a sprawling, disorienting labyrinth of ancient, twisted roots, towering tropical trees, and broad, dense leaves that effectively and consistently block out the natural sunlight in many areas. This geographical reality plunges the forest floor into a perpetual, heavy state of twilight, an unnatural darkness that persists even during the brightest hours of the midday sun. It is a highly demanding environment where safe navigation requires constant, unwavering vigilance from even the most experienced travelers. The sheer, overwhelming density of the surrounding flora means that a person stepping merely a few short feet off the established, beaten trail can be instantaneously and completely swallowed by the vast green expanse, becoming completely invisible to anyone who might be passing by on the main path just moments later. Coupled directly with the treacherous, unstable nature of the coastal cliffs and the raw, unbridled power of the ocean swells that continuously and violently batter the jagged coastline, the western shore of Tutuila presents a truly formidable physical challenge to absolutely anyone attempting to traverse it alone. It is precisely within this breathtaking, visually stunning, yet supremely perilous landscape that a deeply disturbing series of events quietly occurred, events that would systematically and forever alter the public perception of these shores and weave a remarkably dark, enduring thread into the historical tapestry of the local community. The investigative files resting in the local archives regarding these specific events are as profoundly frustrating as they are deeply heartbreaking to review. They systematically detail a chilling, repetitive pattern of sudden vanishings that completely defy conventional geographical or investigative explanation. The sole subjects of these deeply unsettling official records are exclusively young women. These were entirely ordinary individuals who, for various personal reasons, found themselves walking completely alone along these highly isolated western trails or traversing the deserted, rocky beaches. The specific timing of their physical presence in these remote areas serves as a highly critical, recurring, and deeply concerning element in every single recorded account. These sudden disappearances did absolutely not occur under the harsh, revealing, and highly visible glare of the midday sun. Instead, the records show that they consistently unfolded exclusively during the brief, liminal hours of the day, specifically occurring during the soft, visually deceptive fading light of twilight or during the quiet, heavily misted, and visually obscured moments of early dawn. There is something profoundly, inherently haunting about these specific times of day within this particular geographical context. Twilight, acting as the fleeting transition between daylight and deep darkness, and dawn, serving as the slow, hazy awakening of the natural world, are both distinct periods characterized by a heavy, natural stillness, a pervasive quietness that can be interpreted as either immensely peaceful or intensely, psychologically unnerving. In the specific context of the dense western shores of Tutuila, these transitional hours serve to drape the already thick rainforests and the empty, sprawling beaches in heavy, unpredictable shadows, severely obscuring sight lines and drastically amplifying the psychological weight of every rustle of leaves or distant crash of the ocean waves. It was precisely during these specific, highly ambiguous, and visually compromised hours that these young women stepped onto the solitary trails, continuing their personal journeys, only to simply and completely cease to exist within the physical, observable realm of the island. What truly elevates these specific cases far beyond the parameters of typical, tragic missing persons reports and firmly plants them into the realm of the profoundly, deeply disturbing is the absolute, terrifying cleanliness of their disappearances. Under normal circumstances, when a person meets with an unfortunate physical accident in a remote wilderness setting, or when they sadly fall victim to a violent, interpersonal crime, the immediate natural environment almost always bears the physical, observable scars of that traumatic event. A physical struggle inevitably leaves behind broken branches, heavily disturbed topsoil, or frantically scattered personal belongings. An accidental fall or injury often results in a highly visible, clear path of physical disruption leading directly to the location of the victim. However, in the highly specific cases of the young women inexplicably vanishing from the western beaches and trails of Tutuila, the physical environment offered absolutely nothing to the deeply frustrated investigators. There were entirely no signs of a physical struggle anywhere along the known routes. There was absolutely no trampled foliage to suggest a desperate, violent fight for survival or a frantic, chaotic attempt to escape an unseen, aggressive pursuer. Even more inexplicably and frustratingly, there was an absolute, complete absence of any physical evidence or personal effects left behind on the trails. In highly typical, standard investigations of this nature, trained search and rescue teams might reasonably expect to discover a randomly dropped piece of clothing, an abandoned shoe, a fallen bag, or some other mundane, everyday personal item that serves to physically mark the sudden, unexpected interruption of a person's journey. Yet, upon the winding trails of Leon and Amanave, the extensive searches yielded nothing but a terrifying, absolute void of information. The paths remained entirely undisturbed, holding absolutely no clues, and offering no scattered remnants of the human lives that had just vanished from them. It was exactly as if the solid earth of the island had simply, silently opened up and swallowed them whole without disturbing a single surrounding leaf, or as if their physical forms had dissolved entirely into the salty, humid coastal air. This profound, absolute lack of any physical, tangible evidence forced the local search and rescue teams to rely incredibly heavily on specialized tracking methods, most notably the urgent deployment of highly trained, experienced sniffer dogs. These specialized canines are heavily accustomed to deciphering and tracking the microscopic, normally invisible trails of human scent left behind by regular physical movement, and they are typically highly capable of accurately following a specific person's path through complex, dense environments long after that person has physically passed through the area. Yet, the specific deployment of these highly capable tracking dogs into the dense western forests of Tutuila only served to severely deepen the agonizing, ongoing mystery. According to the meticulous official records and the highly detailed, frustrated notes of the dog handlers, the tracking animals would consistently and initially pick up the strong, clear scent of the missing young women at the very start of the trail, moving with obvious purpose, focus, and clear direction. But repeatedly, in a highly specific pattern that deeply frustrated and fundamentally chilled the professional investigators to their core, the dogs would reach a seemingly random, arbitrary point directly on the established path and suddenly, inexplicably stop tracking. The human scent did not gradually, slowly fade away as it naturally might if a person had wandered far off the path and deep into the unreachable distance. Instead, the dogs physically reacted as if the invisible olfactory thread they were diligently following had been violently, instantly severed. The animals would routinely circle in deep confusion and distress, their physical behavior clearly indicating to their handlers a complete, highly abrupt termination of the continuous scent trail right there on the flat dirt of the path. For the experienced handlers and the anxious search teams watching this process, the immediate implication was entirely paralyzing. The specific, distressed reaction of the trained dogs did not in any way suggest a victim who had simply wandered off the main path and unfortunately become lost in the thick, disorienting foliage. It suggested, almost impossibly, that the missing victim had simply, cleanly vanished from that exact, specific spot on the earth, leaving absolutely no further olfactory footprint to follow, evaporating from the trail as cleanly and completely as a phantom in the night. The profound, enduring absence of any physical evidence whatsoever creates a highly unique and incredibly frustrating kind of investigative paralysis. Without an identifiable crime scene, without any tangible physical clues to process, and completely without a clear, logical trajectory of human movement to track, local law enforcement and community search teams were essentially left entirely grasping at invisible shadows within a profoundly difficult, dangerous environment. The sheer, overwhelming ruggedness of the local terrain, directly combined with the heavily impenetrable nature of the dense, dark vegetation and the highly unforgiving, lethal power of the adjacent coastal waters, meant that absolutely every single search operation was heavily fraught with extreme physical danger and severe logistical nightmares. Every single rocky crevice, every hidden, sheer drop, and every dense, tangled thicket had to be officially considered a highly potential location for a body, yet the sheer, overwhelming vastness of the untamed wilderness made conducting truly comprehensive, definitive searches practically and physically impossible. The hostile terrain itself effectively became an active, silent adversary in the desperate quest for answers, fiercely guarding its dark secrets behind an impenetrable wall of green vines, ancient roots, and aggressively crashing white water. This entirely insurmountable geographical challenge, perfectly combined with the totally inexplicable, completely clean nature of the disappearances themselves, inevitably created a highly fertile, deeply unsettling ground for profound psychological unease to take firm root within the isolated island community. When strict logic and systematic, scientific investigation completely and utterly fail to provide any rational answers, the human mind invariably, inevitably seeks alternative, deeply ingrained explanations to forcibly fill the terrifying, gaping void of the absolute unknown. The physical act of traversing the rugged western trails of Tutuila during the delicate transitional hours of dusk and dawn is an inherently profound sensory experience that rapidly shifts from breathtaking natural beauty to an overwhelming, almost suffocating sense of geographic isolation. As the brilliant tropical sun begins its slow, inevitable descent toward the vast horizon of the Pacific Ocean, or conversely, as it struggles to pierce the heavy, salt-laden marine layer of the early morning, the very fabric of the environment along the shores of Leon and Amanave undergoes a radical and intensely unsettling transformation. The dense, sprawling canopy of the ancient rainforest, which during the peak hours of midday provides a welcome, cooling shade against the oppressive equatorial heat, quickly mutates into a formidable, practically impenetrable roof that aggressively filters out the remaining ambient light. This creates a perpetual, heavy twilight on the forest floor, a deeply disorienting optical environment where the towering, twisted trunks of ancient trees and the thick, winding vines that choke the undergrowth are instantly rendered into deeply ambiguous, menacing silhouettes. The narrow, deeply rutted dirt pathways, carved out over countless generations by the continuous tread of local inhabitants, become incredibly difficult to navigate as the fading light flattens the complex, treacherous topography, expertly hiding protruding, jagged roots, slippery, moss-covered rocks, and sudden, deeply terrifying drops in elevation that lead directly to the violently crashing ocean below. To walk these paths alone during these specific, fleeting hours is to willingly surrender oneself to the overwhelming, raw power of a deeply indifferent natural world, an environment where the relentless, deafening roar of the massive oceanic swells constantly battering the unyielding, steep coastal cliffs effectively drowns out any other sound, entirely consuming the subtle noises of the surrounding forest and ensuring that a sudden scream for help, a frantic cry of distress, or the terrifying sounds of a violent physical struggle would be completely, instantly swallowed by the overwhelming acoustic violence of the crashing waves. It is precisely within this deeply chaotic, visually compromised, and aggressively loud environment that the specific, terrifying incidents of the vanishings occurred, striking with a suddenness and a complete lack of physical evidence that completely defies every conventional expectation of modern forensic science and standard criminal investigation. When we attempt to reconstruct the exact timeline of these deeply disturbing events, we are forced to confront an agonizing, entirely blank canvas, a terrifying void of information that is practically unprecedented in the annals of missing persons cases. We must meticulously visualize a young woman, intimately familiar with every subtle curve and dangerous hazard of the local trail, making her solitary journey through the dense, encroaching shadows of the rainforest. She is entirely unalarmed, firmly grounded in the comfortable routine of her daily island life, purposefully navigating the rugged terrain with the quiet confidence of someone who has walked this exact same path countless times before. There is absolutely no reason for her to suspect that she is in any immediate, mortal danger, no lingering sense of profound unease to warn her of the completely incomprehensible fate that is rapidly approaching. And then, in a fraction of a second, between one entirely ordinary footstep and the next, she is simply and completely gone. The deeply terrifying nature of this specific incident does not lie in a sudden, violent confrontation that can be physically mapped and logically understood, but rather in the profound, absolute silence and the terrifying cleanliness of the vanishing itself. The physical environment, usually so easily scarred and violently disrupted by human conflict or accidental tragedy, retains absolutely no memory of her sudden disappearance. The damp, dark earth of the narrow trail, highly susceptible to recording the deep, frantic impressions of running feet or the chaotic, dragged marks of a desperate physical struggle, remains completely smooth, entirely undisturbed, and entirely ordinary. The dense, thick walls of lush green foliage that aggressively crowd the narrow path show absolutely no signs of being violently pushed aside or aggressively trampled by someone desperately attempting to flee an unseen attacker or helplessly stumbling off the edge of the perilous cliff. The meticulous, Heavily scrutinized case files clearly and repeatedly emphasize this profound lack of tangible evidence, creating a deeply frustrating, practically insurmountable wall for the initial responding investigators and the desperate, searching families. In any standard, conventional scenario involving an unexpected abduction, a violent physical assault, or even a sudden, catastrophic geographical accident, there is an established, completely logical expectation that the victim will inevitably leave behind some form of physical anchor to the material world, a vital, tangible clue that physically marks the exact location where their normal life was violently interrupted. Investigators actively scour the immediate surroundings for torn fragments of brightly colored clothing snagged on the sharp, unforgiving thorns of the underbrush, desperately look for a dropped piece of personal jewelry shining dully in the dirt, or actively search for an abandoned shoe, a fallen bag, or even deeply disturbed soil that might indicate a sudden slip or a violent fall into the hidden, treacherous volcanic lava tubes that heavily honeycomb the area. Yet, on the deeply shadowed trails of the western coast, there was absolutely nothing. The disappearances were executed with a horrifying, surgical precision that left the natural environment completely untouched and totally pristine. The young women were stripped from the physical world so cleanly and so absolutely that it fundamentally shattered the logical parameters of reality for those left behind to search. There was no scattered debris, no broken branches, no blood, and absolutely no indication that a human being had ever been present at that specific location, let alone that they had just suffered a completely unknown, deeply terrifying, and ultimately permanent fate. This terrifyingly clean nature of the incident forced the incredibly frustrated search teams to rely heavily on the absolute edges of their investigative capabilities, pushing them desperately toward the specialized deployment of highly trained tracking canines in a frantic, urgent bid to locate any invisible trace of the missing girls. The introduction of the highly specialized, extensively trained search and rescue dogs to the dense, unforgiving environment of the Tutuila rainforest represents the most intensely chilling, deeply inexplicable phase of the entire incident. These magnificent tracking animals are biologically engineered to perceive the world entirely through a complex, highly detailed olfactory landscape that is completely invisible and entirely incomprehensible to human senses. They are explicitly trained to isolate and relentlessly follow the microscopic, continuously shedding trail of human scent, the tiny, invisible particles of skin and sweat that gently fall to the earth with every single movement a person makes, creating an invisible, continuous ribbon of scent that can persist in the environment long after the person has physically departed. When the eager tracking dogs were initially brought to the rugged western trails and officially introduced to the specific scent profiles of the missing young women, their immediate physical reactions were highly encouraging and entirely consistent with standard, successful tracking operations. The handlers meticulously recorded that the dogs would enthusiastically lower their heads, heavily burying their sensitive noses deep into the damp, dark soil and the decaying tropical vegetation, quickly and confidently acquiring the invisible scent trail of the vanished girls. The animals would immediately begin to pull strongly against their heavy leather harnesses, moving with a fast, determined, and highly focused energy along the established, winding dirt paths, clearly indicating to the desperate search teams that they were actively following a strong, highly concentrated, and entirely unbroken trail of human presence. For a few brief, incredibly tense moments, a profound sense of fragile hope would surge through the exhausted search parties, an intense, desperate belief that the highly capable dogs would successfully navigate the deeply treacherous landscape and finally lead them directly to the precise location of the missing victims, physically solving the agonizing mystery and bringing an end to the unbearable, suffocating uncertainty. However, this fragile, desperate hope was repeatedly, violently, and inexplicably shattered by a highly specific, deeply unnatural phenomenon that completely terrified the experienced canine handlers and fundamentally altered the entire psychological trajectory of the investigation. The meticulously documented official records state that as the focus dogs relentlessly followed the invisible scent trail deep into the overgrown, shadowed canopy of the forest, moving further and further away from the relative safety of the village outskirts, they would suddenly, violently, and entirely without warning abruptly stop tracking. This cessation of tracking was not the gradual, entirely normal fading of an old, heavily degraded scent that had been slowly washed away by the heavy tropical rains or naturally dispersed by the strong coastal winds. It was an instant, highly abrupt, and profoundly absolute termination of the scent trail at a highly specific, entirely arbitrary geographical point directly on the path. The experienced handlers described a scene of profound canine confusion and deep psychological distress. The highly trained dogs, previously moving with incredible forward momentum and crystal-clear purpose, would suddenly halt, heavily sniffing the exact same small patch of dirt repeatedly, moving their heads in frantic, tight circles as if desperately searching for a vital, invisible connection that had been instantaneously and violently severed. They would pace nervously back and forth across the narrow width of the trail, whining softly in deep frustration and profound confusion, before ultimately sitting down on the damp earth and looking up at their handlers in total, absolute defeat. To the deeply experienced professionals heavily trained in understanding and interpreting canine behavior, the specific physical actions of the dogs communicated a single, entirely impossible, and deeply horrifying reality. The invisible ribbon of human scent did not slowly wander off the path into the deep, impenetrable brush, nor did it gradually fade into nothingness. Instead, it stopped completely, instantly, and absolutely dead in its tracks. It was as if the missing young woman had simply walked up to that specific, random point on the dirt trail and instantaneously, cleanly evaporated directly into the humid tropical air, leaving absolutely no further olfactory trace, no physical continuation of her journey, and absolutely no logical, earthly explanation for her sudden, terrifying absence. This specific, completely inexplicable failure of the highly reliable tracking dogs served as the definitive, horrifying climax of the incident itself, transforming a deeply tragic missing persons case into an absolute, practically supernatural impossibility that defied all logical explanation and completely paralyzed the ongoing investigative efforts. The sudden, unnatural end of the scent trail, combined perfectly with the absolute, pristine cleanliness of the physical environment, firmly cemented the deeply terrifying nature of the disappearances, leaving behind a heavily lingering, profoundly cold atmosphere of dread that would permanently haunt the western shores and deeply scar the collective psyche of the island community for generations to come. The initial official response to the disappearances on the western coast of Tutuila began with a frantic, high-stakes energy that typically characterizes the critical first 48 hours of a missing persons investigation, a period where every passing second is measured in the agonizing weight of potential survival or tragic loss. Local law enforcement, recognizing the extreme severity of the situation and the inherent dangers of the rugged landscape, immediately established a temporary command post near the trailheads in Leon, transforming the quiet, seaside village into a hub of urgent activity. The air was thick with the sound of idling police vehicles, the crackle of high-frequency radios, and the rhythmic thud of heavy boots on the damp earth as search teams mobilized. These teams were comprised of a diverse group of individuals, ranging from seasoned police officers and territorial officials to a massive influx of local volunteers who knew the terrain intimately, having spent their entire lives navigating the very paths where the young women had vanished. The search strategy was systematic and exhaustive, involving a grid-based sweep of the dense tropical rainforest that flanked the coastal roads. Searchers moved in long, synchronized lines through the thick undergrowth, using heavy machetes to hack through the aggressive vines and broad-leaved tropical plants that obscured the forest floor. They looked for anything that seemed out of place, any slight disruption in the natural order that might signal a clue, but as the hours stretched into days, the oppressive heat and suffocating humidity of the island began to take a physical and psychological toll on everyone involved. As the physical search on the ground yielded absolutely no tangible results, the investigation began to lean heavily into specialized geographical and geological expertise to account for the possibility of a catastrophic natural accident. The western coastline of Tutuila is a geological masterpiece of volcanic violence, characterized by ancient lava flows that have created a landscape filled with hidden, lethal traps. One of the primary focal points of the investigation became the existence of lava tubes, which are subterranean tunnels formed when the surface of a molten lava stream cools and hardens while the interior continues to flow, eventually draining out and leaving behind a hollow, often extremely unstable chamber. These tubes can run for miles beneath the surface of the island, often perfectly concealed by layers of soil and thick, deceptive vegetation. A person walking off the established trail could easily step onto a thin, weathered crust of rock and plummet into an abyss that is essentially a natural tomb, invisible from the surface and nearly impossible to locate without specific geological maps. Investigative teams, equipped with specialized lighting and climbing gear, spent grueling hours rappelling into known openings and examining rocky fissures, but even these high-risk efforts failed to produce any evidence of the missing girls. Simultaneously, the United States Coast Guard and local marine units conducted extensive sweeps of the treacherous waters below the Leon and Amon Ave cliffs. They monitored the powerful coastal currents and analyzed the behavior of the massive Pacific swells that relentlessly batter the jagged rocks, searching for any sign of a body or personal effects that might have been swept out to sea. The ocean, however, proved to be as tight-lipped as the forest, offering nothing but the endless, rhythmic crash of white water against the dark, volcanic stone. With the geographical and accidental theories failing to provide answers, the investigation was forced to pivot toward the much darker, more sinister possibility of human malevolence. The theory of a Kusanwa Jalmat, or a hidden predator living among the community, began to dominate the discussions within the command post. Detectives began the painstaking process of profiling the local population, conducting background checks on individuals with a history of violence or suspicious behavior, and interviewing anyone who had been in the vicinity of the western beaches during the times of the disappearances. The primary challenge facing the criminal investigators was the absolute, terrifying lack of a traditional crime scene. In almost every case of abduction or foul play, there is some form of struggle, some evidence of forced entry or a violent encounter, yet here, the scenes remained pristine. This led to a deeply disturbing twist in the investigative logic. The lack of a struggle suggested that either the victims were taken completely by surprise by someone with expert knowledge of the terrain, or they had been lured away by someone they knew and trusted. The detectives examined the possibility of a highly mobile kidnapper who used the isolated roads to transport victims quickly and efficiently, but the island's geography makes such a feat incredibly difficult to execute without being noticed in such a small, observant community. Every car, every boat, and every suspicious movement was scrutinized, but the investigation remained perpetually stalled by the same frustrating reality that had plagued the search teams from the beginning. There was no physical trail to follow, no forensic evidence to process, and no witnesses who had seen anything out of the ordinary. The most significant psychological blow to the investigation, and the moment that many locals consider the true twist in the narrative, occurred when the tracking dogs consistently failed at the exact same point on the trails. This was not a failure of the animal's abilities, but a failure of logical reality itself. When the dogs reached a specific, seemingly random spot on the path and their behavior shifted from focused tracking to aimless confusion, it sent a shiver through the investigative team. To the seasoned detectives, this was the ultimate dead end. It suggested a level of cleanliness in the disappearance that defied the laws of physics. If a person is snatched by a human, there is a continuation of scent as they are carried or led away. If a person falls into a hole, the scent pools around that hole. For the scent to simply vanish into the air suggested that the victim had been lifted off the ground or had ceased to exist in a physical form that sheds olfactory particles. This profound investigative failure created a vacuum of logic that was quickly filled by the deep-seated cultural beliefs of the islanders. It was at this juncture that the official police investigation began to run parallel to a much older, more traditional form of understanding. As the investigators sat in the command post looking at empty maps, the village elders and local residents began to speak openly about the Tain Sa, the powerful spirit entities of Samoa. The transition of the investigation from a purely forensic endeavor to one influenced by the Trian Thiet Du Ti, or urban legends of the island, marked a surreal chapter in the case files. While the police could not officially list a spiritual entity as a suspect, they could not ignore the profound impact these beliefs had on the community and the search efforts. The Tain Sa are not mere ghosts in the Western sense. They are described as beautiful, authoritative, and often vengeful goddesses or spirits who guard the natural sanctity of the forests and the sea. According to local tradition, these entities are particularly active during the transitional hours of the day, the very times the girls went missing. The twist here was that the community began to look for reasons why the girls might have offended the Tain Sa, rather than looking for a human killer. The investigation learned of the various taboos that the girls might have inadvertently broken, such as wearing bright red clothing, which is said to attract or offend the spirits, or walking with their long hair down and loose, an act of vanity that is considered a slight to the Tain Sa's own beauty. In the eyes of the elders, the girls hadn't been murdered or lost. They had been dandu, or lured away to another realm as punishment or as chosen companions for the spirits. This cultural narrative explained the lack of a struggle and the sudden termination of the scent trail in a way that modern forensics simply could not. This cultural perspective introduced a new layer of complexity to the investigation, as searchers began to report their own unsettling experiences in the Western woods. Stories emerged of searchers hearing melodic, feminine voices singing from deep within the impenetrable brush, only to find nothing when they investigated the source. Others spoke of seeing a tall, exceptionally beautiful woman standing on the edge of a cliff in the morning mist, who would vanish as soon as someone tried to approach her. While the lead investigators remained committed to a rational, evidence-based approach, the pervasive atmosphere of the supernatural began to sap the morale of the search teams. The investigation became a battle between the desire for cold, hard facts and the heavy, undeniable presence of island mythology. The detectives found themselves in a position where they were investigating not just a crime, but the very soul and fears of the island itself. They continued to follow up on every lead, no matter how small, and re-interviewed every family member, searching for a human explanation that would ground the case back in reality. They looked into the possibility of hermits, or individuals living off the grid in the deep forest, but the density of the jungle and the lack of sustainable resources made this theory as unlikely as the others. The stalemate of the investigation eventually led to a cold, agonizing silence. The command post was eventually dismantled, the specialized search teams returned to their regular duties, and the case files were moved from active status to the HOSO-MO, or open files category. This was the final, most painful twist for the families and the community. In a typical true crime story, the investigation leads to a climax, a breakthrough, or at least a definitive theory, but here, the investigation simply dissolved into a state of permanent uncertainty. The lack of suspects, the lack of bodies, and the lack of even a single piece of physical evidence meant that there could be no closure. The Ke Sanwa Jiao Mat remained hidden, whether that predator was a person, the terrain, or something far more ancient and ethereal. The investigation had done everything according to the book. They had used the best technology, the best dogs, and the most dedicated personnel, and yet they were left with nothing but a series of empty spots on a map and a collection of stories that blurred the line between fact and folklore. This failure to find an answer didn't just leave the case unsolved. It left a permanent scar on the collective psyche of the people of Leon and Amanave, ensuring that the western trails of Tutuila would forever be viewed through a lens of suspicion and dread. The investigation didn't just fail to find the victims. It failed to provide a reality that the community could live with, leaving them to navigate a world where the beautiful landscape they called home was now a place of profound, unresolved terror. In the standard arc of a criminal investigation, the phase of trial and results typically serves as the definitive anchor of the narrative, providing a much-needed sense of resolution and the formal restoration of societal order through the mechanisms of the justice system. It is the moment where the chaotic fragments of evidence are meticulously assembled into a coherent timeline, where suspects are forced to face the heavy weight of their actions, and where the grieving families are finally granted the somber closure of a legal verdict. However, when examining the profoundly haunting history of the missing young women along the western shores of Tutuila, we are forced to confront a radically different and deeply disturbing reality. In these specific cases, the courtroom, that sacred space of public accountability and forensic truth, remained entirely and agonizingly silent. There were no dramatic opening statements from a determined prosecutor, no tense cross-examinations of a cornered suspect, and no heavy fall of a wooden gavel to signal the end of the community's long, terrifying nightmare. The result of these investigations was not a conviction or an acquittal, but rather a permanent, echoing void that fundamentally challenged the very foundations of the legal and social structure of American Samoa. The absolute lack of a trial is, in many ways, the most chilling detail of the entire saga, as it officially codifies the total failure of human logic and institutional power to provide an answer to a tragedy that had systematically dismantled the island's sense of safety. To understand why the legal process was so utterly paralyzed, one must look at the immense, insurmountable barrier presented by the total absence of physical evidence. In any jurisdiction following the principles of modern law, the concept of corpus delicti, the body of the crime, is a fundamental requirement for a successful prosecution. While it is technically possible to try a case without a physical body, it is an incredibly difficult and rare legal feat that requires a mountain of secondary, circumstantial evidence, so overwhelming that it leaves no room for any other logical explanation. In the vanishings at Leon and Amanave, however, the investigators were not just missing a body. They were missing a crime scene, a weapon, a motive, and a suspect. The result, recorded in the official files, was a series of cold, administrative notations that lacked any sense of justice. Each folder was eventually stamped with the words Ho So Mo, open file, a designation that sounds proactive but, in reality, served as a quiet admission of defeat. These files were moved from the active, high-pressure desks of the investigators to the dusty, silent archives of the police headquarters, where they became static monuments to the unknown. For the families of the victims, this administrative finality was a second, slower form of trauma. They were forced to navigate a legal limbo where their daughters were neither officially deceased nor truly alive, stuck in a bureaucratic gray zone that offered no path forward and no way to look back. The search for a Kusanwa Jalmat, a hidden predator, continued to haunt the internal discussions of the local authorities long after the public search had ceased, but it never reached the threshold of a legal accusation. Detectives spent years quietly monitoring certain individuals, following up on whispers of suspicious behavior or strange movements near the western cliffs, but without a shred of physical evidence, these leads were nothing more than ghosts. The law requires a specific person to be tied to a specific act, but the disappearances on the western coast were so incredibly clean and so devoid of human fingerprints that the legal system could not even find a place to begin its work. There were no records of a struggle, no DNA to sequence, and no witnesses to testify. The result of this forensic void was that the shadow of suspicion was cast indiscriminately over the entire community, creating an atmosphere of quiet, enduring paranoia. In a small island society where everyone is connected, the lack of a definitive trial meant that anyone could potentially be a monster, and yet no one could be proven guilty. This lack of a legal resolution prevented the community from undergoing the necessary process of healing, as the threat remained theoretically present, hidden somewhere in the dense, dark foliage of the rainforest or behind the friendly smile of a neighbor. Furthermore, the result of the investigation was deeply influenced by the unique geographical reality that had thwarted the search teams from the very beginning. The official reports eventually summarized the vanishings as being unexplained, a term that serves as a bridge between a tragic accident and a sinister crime without committing to either. The legal system had to grapple with the high probability that the rugged, volcanic terrain had simply and efficiently disposed of any evidence. The steep, unstable cliffs and the deep, hidden lava tubes were essentially silent partners in whatever had occurred, providing an environment where a human life could be extinguished and completely erased from the physical record in a matter of seconds. In the eyes of the law, the result was a stalemate between the capabilities of modern investigation and the sheer, unyielding power of the natural world. The case files remained open not because there was a lingering hope of a breakthrough, but because the alternative, officially closing a case with no body and no explanation, was an admission of powerlessness that the authorities were reluctant to make. The folders sat in the archives as a permanent, open question, a legal scar on the island's history that would never be allowed to fade. For the parents and siblings of the missing girls, the lack of a trial meant that the formal recognition of their loss was stripped of its gravity. In a typical case, a trial provides a platform for the victims' lives to be honored and for their stories to be told in a way that demands the world's attention. In the absence of a courtroom, the stories of the girls of Leon and Amanave were relegated to the realm of trianthiat duty and whispered gossip. The result for the families was a lifetime of unspent grief and a relentless, torturous cycle of what-ifs. Without a body to bury, many families found it impossible to hold traditional funerals, leading to a state of perpetual, frozen mourning. The legal system, which is designed to provide a sense of finality, instead offered only a series of empty signatures and unresolved questions. This failure of the state to provide a result created a profound sense of isolation for the grieving households, as they were left to carry the weight of their loss without the validation of a legal verdict. The silence of the courts became a mirror of the silence of the forest where their daughters had disappeared, a cold and indifferent response to an unimaginable tragedy. As the years turned into decades, the ho-so-mo status of these cases became a part of the island's collective legacy, a reminder of the limits of human authority. The result of the vanishings was a permanent change in the social contract of the island. The police, unable to provide a legal resolution, instead provided warnings, which were a different kind of result. They couldn't give the families justice, so they gave the community a set of rules to prevent future tragedies. This was a pragmatic but deeply unsatisfying outcome. The legal system effectively conceded the Western trails to the unknown, signaling that the safety of those paths could no longer be guaranteed by the presence of the law. The result was an unofficial surrender of territory to the shadows. Every time a new official took over the cold case unit, they would review the thin files, see the lack of evidence, and realize that there was nothing more to be done. The result was not a failure of will, but a failure of the physical world to provide the necessary materials for a trial to exist. The girls had vanished so completely that they had left behind no legal footprint, no forensic echo, and no path for justice to follow. The lack of a trial also meant that the competing theories, the Ku Sanwa Jalmat versus the Tuk the Tomlin, were never officially tested or resolved. In a courtroom, the prosecution would have had to present a theory that could withstand the scrutiny of defense and judge. Without this process, both theories were allowed to exist simultaneously in the public mind, creating a fractured reality. The result was a community that was divided between those who feared a human killer and those who feared a spiritual punishment. This lack of a singular, authoritative truth is one of the most damaging consequences of an unsolved mystery. It allows the fear to mutate and grow, unconstrained by the boundaries of evidence and law. The result of the vanishings was therefore not a conclusion, but a continuation. The girls of Tutuila remained missing in every sense of the word, missing from their homes, missing from the records of the dead, and missing from the halls of justice. Their absence was not just a physical fact, but a legal and social condition that defined the Western Coast for generations. Ultimately, the result of the missing girls of the Western Beach is found in the enduring power of the mystery itself. Because there was no trial, there was no ending to the story, and stories without endings have a way of becoming legends. The lack of a legal verdict allowed the narrative to be absorbed into the cultural fabric of the island, where it transformed from a series of criminal reports into a cautionary tale that blurs the line between the natural and the supernatural. The result is the quiet, heavy atmosphere that still hangs over the trails of Leon and Amanave today. It is the way people quicken their pace as the sun begins to set, and the way mothers still watch their daughters with a lingering, protective anxiety. The justice system may have been defeated by the silence of the rainforest and the depth of the ocean, but the memory of the missing young women remains a powerful, living presence on the island. The result is a community that has learned to live with the unanswerable, a society that understands that some shadows are too deep for the light of a courtroom to ever reach. The open files remain in the archives, their pages yellowing with time, serving as a permanent testament to the girls who stepped into the twilight and never came back, and to a legal system that was left searching for footprints on a trail that led nowhere. The passage of time in a place as geographically isolated and culturally resilient as Tutuila does not function as a healing balm in the way many modern psychologists might suggest, but rather as a slow, rhythmic layering of memory over an unhealed wound. Decades have drifted past since the most prominent of these disappearances first gripped the western shores of the island, yet the silence that followed the cessation of the official investigations has never been a peaceful one. Instead, it is a heavy, expectant silence that continues to resonate within the collective consciousness of the people of American Samoa. To walk the coastal roads of Leon or Amanave today is to traverse a landscape that is profoundly beautiful yet permanently altered by an invisible history of loss. The majestic cliffs still stand as silent sentinels against the vastness of the Pacific, and the rainforest remains a vibrant, pulsing wall of green, but for the local inhabitants, the natural splendor is forever intertwined with the chilling knowledge of those who stepped into these very shadows and simply ceased to exist. The aftermath of the missing girls of the West Beach is not found in a stack of closed court records or a commemorative plaque, but in the subtle, pervasive shift in how a community interacts with its own environment, a transformation that has turned a familiar home into a place of guarded vigilance and enduring mystery. This enduring legacy is most visibly manifest in what has become a rigid, unwritten code of conduct that governs the movements of every woman and child on the island. The Quitakangam, or hidden rule, that emerged from the vacuum of the unsolved cases is a stark, pragmatic survival mechanism that has been passed down from mothers to daughters for generations. It is a simple yet absolute command. You do not walk the western coastal paths alone after the sun begins its descent, and you never, under any circumstances, find yourself on the jungle trails during the liminal hours of twilight or dawn. This is not merely a piece of casual advice or a parental superstition. It is a deeply ingrained cultural boundary that defines the limits of human safety on the island. The tragedy of the missing girls effectively redrew the map of Tutuila, marking the western shores as a territory where the protection of the community and the authority of the law do not fully reach. This rule serves as a constant, daily reminder of the victims, a living testament to their absence that is reinforced every time a family gathers their members indoors as the sky turns to purple and gold. The aftermath is thus a permanent state of caution, a collective acknowledgement that the island's beauty hides a predatory edge that has never been truly blunted or explained. The psychological impact of these unresolved disappearances has created a profound Vet Thuong Chua Lan, an unhealed wound that manifests as a unique form of communal trauma. In a typical crime story, the capture of a perpetrator allows the community to externalize their fear, focusing it on a single individual who has been removed from their midst. But on the western coast of Tutuila, the fear remains internalized and diffuse. Because no one was ever caught, and because no bodies were ever recovered to provide a physical site for mourning, the threat remains an abstract, omnipresent force. This has led to a fascinating and deeply unsettling fusion of modern anxiety and ancient belief. The Tuk the Tomlin, or spiritual entities like the Tain Sa, have moved from the realm of old folklore into the reality of contemporary life, providing the only framework that can adequately contain the sheer impossibility of the disappearances. For many, believing in the Tain Sa is not an act of superstition, but a necessary psychological bridge. It is often less terrifying to believe that a beautiful, powerful goddess chose to take a young girl to another realm than to believe that a human monster is still walking among them, or that the very earth they stand on is riddled with lethal, invisible traps that can swallow a life without leaving a trace. This cultural integration of the mystery has ensured that the missing girls are never truly forgotten, but it has also relegated their lives to the status of a cautionary tale. There is a deep, inherent sadness in the way these young women have been transformed from individuals with names, dreams, and futures into symbols of a communal warning. Their identities have been partially absorbed by the legends of the island, their stories told in hushed tones to keep the next generation of children from wandering too far. The Ho So Mo, or open files in the police archives, are mirrored by an open question in the heart of the community. Every time a new girl reaches adolescence in Lyon, her parents look at her with a specific, lingering anxiety that is directly tethered to the ghosts of the past. The aftermath is found in the way a father's grip tightens on his daughter's hand when they walk near the forest edge, and in the way the village streets become strangely, unnervingly quiet the moment the sun dips below the horizon. The loss of innocence on the island was not just about the victims themselves, but about the permanent loss of the feeling that the island was a completely safe sanctuary for its youth. Reflecting on the nature of these cases forces us to confront the profound limits of human perception and the terrifying indifference of the natural world. The Chi Teek Ky law, such as the sudden termination of the scent trails and the absolute cleanliness of the disappearance sites, continue to challenge our need for a rational, evidence-based reality. We are left to ponder the vast Koang Trong, the empty space between the harsh physical reality of the rugged Tutuila coastline and the hauntingly beautiful stories of the spirits that supposedly guard it. Was it the Ko San Hua Jiao Mat, a human of exceptional cunning and cruelty? Or was it the lava tubes and the Song Lon, the mechanical, unfeeling accidents of a volcanic landscape? Or, as the elders still whisper, was it something that defies our understanding of biology and physics altogether? The tragedy of the West Beach vanishings is that all of these explanations remain equally possible and equally unprovable. The lack of a conclusion is the most enduring part of the story, a descent of uncertainty that has become as much a part of the island's geography as the volcanic rock and the tropical ferns. For the families who still live in the shadow of these events, the aftermath is a quiet, daily endurance of frozen grief. In a world where we demand answers and closure, these families have had to learn to live in a state of permanent suspension. There is no headstone to visit, no final report to read, and no sense of justice to lean on. They are the keepers of the most painful, Ho So Mo, holding on to memories of daughters who walked out the door and into a twilight that never ended. Their lives are a testament to the fact that some mysteries do not get solved. They simply become a part of the atmosphere. The suingam, or reflection that we are left with as we look back on these cases, is one of profound humility. We are reminded that despite our technology, our forensic science, and our social structures, we are still small and vulnerable in the face of a wild, ancient landscape that does not play by our rules. The western coast of Tutuila remains a place of breathtaking majesty, but it is a beauty that demands a price of constant, watchful respect. As the waves continue to batter the cliffs at Amanave, they serve as a rhythmic, eternal reminder of the girls who are no longer there to hear them. The story of the missing young women of the West Beach is a narrative of gaps. The gap in the police files, the gap in the family photos, and the gap in the community's sense of peace. It is a story that reminds us that the line between the mundane and the macabre is often as thin as the mist that rolls off the Pacific at dawn. The legacy of these vanishings is a lingering, cold breath on the back of the neck of anyone who walks the trails of Lyon alone. It is the realization that we share our world with shadows we cannot name and depths we cannot fathom. The files may be open, the cases may be unsolved, and the suspects may be hidden, but the girls of the West Beach live on in the rules the islanders follow, the stories they tell, and the silence they keep when the sun goes down. They have become a permanent part of the island's soul, a tragic and beautiful mystery that will remain as long as the jungle grows and the ocean roars against the shore, a haunting reminder that on the island of Tutuila, the past is never truly gone. It is just waiting in the shadows of the next twilight. Ultimately, the story of the missing girls is a reflection on the intersection of human fragility and the overwhelming power of a place. It forces us to ask what it means to live in a landscape that is both a provider of life and a consumer of it. The Vet Thuong Chua Lan is a sign of a community that loves its home so much that it is willing to live with its most terrifying secrets. The legacy is one of resilience in the face of the inexplicable, a society that has built a life around a void. As we close this chapter of our investigation, we are left not with an answer, but with a feeling. The feeling of a cool breeze coming off the cliffs, the sound of a voice lost in the crashing waves, and the sight of a trail that leads into the green heart of the island and simply stops. The girls of Tutuila are not just a cold case. They are the spirit of the West Beach itself, a permanent part of the island's mystery that will never be solved, never be forgotten, and never be fully understood. The Ho-So remains open, and perhaps, in a place as ancient and mystical as this, it was always meant to stay that way, a permanent testament to the things that vanish in the light of the setting sun. As we sit here in the middle of May in the year 2026, the world feels significantly smaller, more illuminated, and perhaps a bit more transparent than it did during the height of the disappearances along the western coast of Tutuila. We live in an era defined by constant connectivity, where satellite imagery can zoom into the smallest rocky crevice, and where every individual carries a high-definition camera and a GPS tracker in their pocket. Yet, despite this technological saturation, the mystery of the missing young women of Leon and Amanave remains as impenetrable and as chillingly silent as the day the first girls stepped into the shadows and never returned. This final chapter of our exploration is not about new evidence or a sudden breakthrough, because in the decades that have passed, there have been none. Instead, this is an examination of the long, enduring shadow that a truly unsolvable mystery casts over time, and how a community learns to live, thrive, and protect itself in the presence of a void that neither science, nor law, nor technology has been able to fill. The western shores of Tutuila today are a fascinating study in contrast, where the high-speed fiber-optic cables of the digital age run alongside ancient, winding trails that the locals still treat with a profound and deeply ingrained sense of spiritual caution. The digital age has brought a new kind of haunting to the island, one that exists in the ethereal spaces of the internet. In recent years, the Ho-So MO, or open files of these cases, have been rediscovered by a global community of true crime enthusiasts and amateur sleuths. On various forums and social media platforms, people thousands of miles away from the South Pacific debate the merits of the Ko San Moa Jalmat versus the Tuk the Tom Lin. They pore over old maps of the Leon Cliffs and analyze the geological structures of the lava tubes with digital tools that the original investigators couldn't have imagined. This global attention has created a strange, modern tension on the island. For the local families, these are not just fascinating cold cases to be solved for entertainment. They are living, breathing tragedies that have left empty chairs at family tables for 30 years. There is a protective silence that many in Leon and Amanave maintain, a reluctance to let outsiders turn their profound communal grief into a digital spectacle. This conflict between the modern desire for total transparency and the ancient island tradition of respecting the unknown is perhaps the most significant legacy of the vanishings in the 21st century. When we reflect on the Daim Bien Vuan, we are forced to acknowledge that the landscape itself has remained the most consistent and most tight-lipped witness. The thick, tropical rainforest of western Tutuila does not care about the passage of decades or the evolution of human technology. The same aggressive vines that hindered the search parties in the 90s still choke the undergrowth today, and the same deceptive shadows still fall across the trails at twilight. The geological traps, those hidden lava tubes and sheer volcanic drops, are still there, perfectly concealed beneath a carpet of rotting leaves and vibrant ferns. In 2026, even with advanced ground-penetrating radar and drone-based LiDAR mapping, the sheer verticality and density of the Leon coast make a truly comprehensive search of every square inch an impossible task. The geography of the island is its own form of armor, protecting its secrets with a physical stubbornness that defies human intervention. This realization brings a certain sense of humility to our modern perspective. We like to believe that everything can be mapped and everything can be found, but the western coast of Tutuila stands as a stark, beautiful reminder that there are still places on this earth that can swallow a secret and keep it forever. The psychological legacy of the Tain Sa is perhaps more powerful now than it was when the disappearances first occurred. In a world that is increasingly homogenized and explained by algorithms, the persistence of the belief in these powerful spirit entities serves as a vital anchor for Samoan cultural identity. For the youth of Tutuila in 2026, the stories of the goddesses who guard the Western shores are not just ghost stories. They are part of a complex system of respect for the land and the ancestors. The Quitakangam that prevents young women from walking alone at dusk is no longer just about the fear of a human kidnapper. It has evolved into a ritual of cultural mindfulness. To follow the rule is to honor the memory of the missing and to acknowledge the power of the unseen forces that define the island's history. This shift from acute, paralyzing terror to a settled, respectful caution is how the community has managed to heal without ever receiving the closure of a trial or a verdict. The spirits have been integrated into the modern world, serving as the eternal guardians of a mystery that the legal system failed to solve. We must also consider the victims as they would be today, women who would be in their 50s or 60s, perhaps grandmothers watching over a new generation of girls in Leon. The tragedy of their vanishing is not just the loss of their physical presence, but the loss of the entire trajectory of their lives. When a person is murdered and a body is found, there is a definitive end to their story, a point where the mourning can begin to transform into memory. But when a person remains missing for decades, they are trapped in a perpetual state of youth in the public imagination. In the minds of the people of Tutuila, these girls are forever teenagers, forever stepping into the twilight, forever on the verge of disappearing. This frozen status is a heavy burden for their surviving siblings and parents to carry. It creates a form of grief that is never fully processed, a lingering hope that is as painful as it is persistent. The aftermath of these cases is a lesson in the endurance of the human heart, which continues to love and remember in the absolute absence of answers. The Kusanwa Jalmat theory, the idea that a human predator was responsible, still lingers in the darker corners of local conversation, especially when new residents move to the island or when a minor incident occurs near the western beaches. This fear of the hidden monster is the shadow side of the communal intimacy that defines Tutuila. In a place where everyone knows everyone, the idea that a killer could be hiding in plain sight for 30 years is a deeply unsettling thought. It suggests that the social fabric, as strong as it is, has flaws that can be exploited by someone with enough patience and local knowledge. This theory keeps the community vigilant, but it also creates a subtle, underlying tension that never truly dissipates. The lack of a resolution has meant that the predator is never gone. They are merely unseen, a permanent possibility that waits in the periphery of the island's peaceful daily life. This is the true hauqua of an unsolved crime. It robs the community of the ability to feel that the threat has been entirely removed. As we look at the Western Coast one final time through the lens of this investigation, we are struck by the profound silence of the environment. The waves continue to crash against the cliffs with a rhythmic indifference that is both beautiful and terrifying. The forest continues to breathe, its leaves rustling in the trade winds, hiding whatever remains may lie beneath its roots. The story of the missing girls of the West Beach is a story of the limits of our reach. It is a story that begins in the physical world of footprints and scent trails and ends in the metaphysical world of legends and spirits. It is a narrative that refuses to be contained by the structures of a podcast or the pages of a case file. The true Quechua of this history is the silence itself, a silence that speaks of the girls who were lost, the families who waited, and the island that watched. Our role as storytellers in the true crime genre is often to provide a sense of order to the chaos of human violence, but here, we must accept the chaos. We must accept that the western shores of Tutuila are a place where the rules of the world we know are slightly different. It is a place where the koang trong between fact and folklore is where the truth actually resides. The girls are gone, the cases are cold, and the trails are empty, but the memory of those vanishings has become a part of the very air the people of Leon and Amanave breathe. It is a memory that warns, a memory that protects, and a memory that honors. The mystery is not a puzzle to be solved, but a legacy to be carried. It is a reminder that even in 2026, there are still sacred and terrifying spaces where the light of the modern world does not reach, and where the shadows still hold the names of those who were taken by the twilight. In the final analysis, the vanishings are a testament to the enduring power of the island of Tutuila itself. The land has a memory longer than any police file and a grip tighter than any handcuffs. It has held these young women in its embrace for 30 years, sheltering them from the prying eyes of the world and the harsh light of the courtroom. Whether they were taken by a person, an accident, or a spirit, they are now a part of the island's geology and its mythology. They are the salt in the spray at Amanave and the rustle in the ferns at Leon. They are the reason the mothers of American Samoa still look toward the west as the sun goes down, and they are the reason the rules of the trail are still spoken in hushed, respectful tones. The story does not end because the ending is written in the landscape in a language we have not yet learned to translate. The files will remain open, the questions will remain unanswered, and the girls will remain exactly where they were last seen, at the edge of the world, stepping into the dark, leaving us with nothing but the sound of the ocean and the enduring, haunting beauty of a mystery that refuses to die. We leave the western shores now, not with the satisfaction of a solved case, but with the quiet, heavy respect that is owed to those who have been swallowed by the unknown, and to the community that keeps their memory alive in the long, beautiful silence of the Pacific. The concept of an open file in the world of criminal justice is often perceived by the public as a symbol of lingering hope, a bureaucratic promise that the state has not yet turned its back on the pursuit of truth or the possibility of eventual resolution. However, for the residents of Tutuila who live in the shadow of the western cliffs, the term Ho'oso'emo carries a far more complex and somber weight. It represents a permanent suspension of reality, a legal and emotional state where the past is never allowed to fully settle and the future is forever haunted by the unresolved. In the quiet hallways of the police headquarters in Pago Pago, these files exist as a collection of aging paper and fading ink, physical remnants of lives that were interrupted by a force that remains as mysterious today as it was decades ago. To look at these files in the year 2026 is to recognize the limits of our own ability to categorize and control the world around us. These documents do not tell a story of a crime solved or a villain caught. They tell a story of a landscape that took something back and refuses to give it up. The open file is not a gateway to an answer, but a monument to the silence of the western beaches, a silence that has become a fundamental characteristic of the island's collective identity. The geographical reality of the western coast of Tutuila remains the most dominant and unyielding factor in this ongoing saga. The lush, aggressive beauty of the rainforests surrounding Leon and Amanave is a direct participant in the preservation of this mystery. As we reflect on the descent of these cases, we must acknowledge that the environment itself has acted as both a witness and a vault. The volcanic nature of the island, with its intricate network of hidden lava tubes and deep fissures, provides a physical explanation for how a human being can vanish without a trace, but it is an explanation that offers no comfort. These geological features are not just hazards, they are permanent repositories of the unknown. In the decades since the vanishings, the jungle has reclaimed any paths that were not maintained, and the ocean has continued to reshape the jagged rocks of the shoreline. The physical scene of the disappearances is in a constant state of flux, yet the central void remains static. This environmental persistence is a crucial part of why the cases remain open in the hearts of the people. You cannot separate the missing girls from the land itself. They have become part of the geography, their stories woven into the very fabric of the cliffs and the crashing waves. The Quitakangam, or hidden rules that govern daily life on the western coast, serve as the most tangible legacy of the tragedy. In 2026, these rules have been so deeply internalized that they are no longer spoken of as a reaction to a specific set of crimes, but as a basic condition of existence. A young girl growing up in Leon today does not necessarily need to be told the specific details of the folders in the police archives to understand that the twilight is a time of danger. She feels it in the way the air changes as the sun dips below the horizon, and she sees it in the way her elders react to the fading light. This generational transfer of caution is a profound form of communal memory. It is a way for the island to protect its future by never forgetting the price paid by its past. The Hao Kwa of the vanishings is thus a permanent alteration of the social contract with the land. The people of Tutuila have learned that there are parts of their island that require a specific kind of vigilance, respectful distance that must be maintained to ensure safety. This collective behavioral shift is perhaps the most effective result the island could produce in the absence of a legal verdict, a pragmatic adaptation to a threat that remains undefined. The enduring duality of the Ku San Hua Jiao Mat and the Tuk the Tom Lin continues to provide the framework through which these events are understood. This tension between the rational and the supernatural is not a sign of a lack of sophistication, but a reflection of the profound complexity of the mystery itself. In the quiet evenings in Amon Ave, the conversation might shift between the forensic possibilities of a human predator and the ancient authority of the Tain Saw. To the people of the island, these are not mutually exclusive ideas. They both represent a force that operates outside the boundaries of normal, everyday life, a force that is clean, efficient, and absolute in its ability to remove a person from the world. Believing in the Tain Saw allows the community to give a name and a face to the inexplicable, transforming a terrifyingly random event into a part of a larger, albeit fearsome, cosmic order. Conversely, the fear of the hidden human predator keeps the community sharp, ensuring that the Kui Takengam are followed with a sense of urgent necessity. Both narratives serve to keep the memory of the missing girls alive, ensuring that their names are not lost to the passage of time. Reflecting on the Chi Tit Ky law of the cases, the way the scent trails simply vanished, and the absolute lack of a struggle, we are forced to confront the concept of the clean disappearance one last time. In a world that is increasingly cluttered with data, fingerprints, and digital footprints, the idea that a human life can be erased so completely is fundamentally terrifying. It challenges our belief in our own permanence and the effectiveness of our systems of protection. The girls of the Western Beach did not just leave, they were subtracted from reality. This specific quality of the vanishings is what makes them so hauntingly beautiful and so deeply tragic. It leaves the families and the community with nothing to hold on to, no physical evidence to process, and no grave to visit. The Koang Trong is not just a gap in the evidence, it is a gap in the world itself. The legacy of the missing women is this permanent, echoing emptiness that continues to resonate through the villages of the West Coast, a reminder that the world is far more mysterious and indifferent than we often care to admit. As we conclude this deep dive into the archives of Tutuila, we are left with a sense of profound empathy for the victims and their families. These were not just names in a Ho So Mo, they were vibrant, young women who were loved and who had futures that were violently and inexplicably cut short. Their legacy is the quiet dignity with which their families have carried their absence, and the way the island community has chosen to remember them through caution and respect. The Tragedy of the West Beach is a story about the endurance of love in the face of absolute uncertainty. It is about a community that refuses to close the files on its own children, even when the world tells them that there is nothing more to be found. The open status of these cases is a testament to the fact that for the people of Samoa, a life is never truly lost as long as its story is still being told, even if that story has no ending. The final reflection on this saga is one of silence, a silence that is not an absence of sound, but a presence of something ancient and powerful. The western coast of Tutuila, with its Leon cliffs and Amon Ave shores, remains a place of intense, breathtaking majesty. It is a landscape that demands a specific kind of courage to live in, a willingness to coexist with the unknown. The missing girls have become part of that silence, their voices lost in the roar of the Pacific and the rustle of the tropical canopy. They are the guardians of the Western Trails, their stories serving as a permanent warning and a permanent bond for the people of the island. We leave the Ho So Mo exactly where we found it, on the desk of history, waiting for an answer that may never come, but serving as a powerful reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be lived with, respected, and remembered. The sun sets over the western coast of Tutuila today just as it did 30 years ago, casting long, distorted shadows across the winding trails of the rainforest. The waves continue to hit the jagged volcanic rocks with a force that can be felt in the very bones of the island. And in the villages of Leon and Almanave, mothers still call their children inside, and young women still quicken their pace as the light begins to fail. The mystery of the missing girls is not a thing of the past. It is a living, breathing part of the present. It is the salt in the air, the dark in the woods, and the enduring, unyielding heart of a community that has learned to find its own form of peace in the presence of a shadow. The files remain open, the wind continues to blow, and the girls of the West Beach remain forever young, forever moving through the twilight, forever a part of the beautiful, terrifying mystery of American Samoa. We close our narrative here, in the year 2026, recognizing that while the search for facts may have reached its limit, the search for meaning and the act of remembering will never end. The story of Tutu'ela's missing daughters is now and forever a part of the island's soul, a story written in the silence between the waves and the shadows between the trees, a story that will be told as long as the Pacific flows against the shore. As we stand within the present moment, on this Friday morning of May 15th, 2026, the world beyond the horizon of American Samoa has transformed into an era of unprecedented surveillance and technological transparency, yet the rugged western shores of Tutu'ela remain a profound and baffling exception to this modern rule. The silence that envelopes the steep cliffs of Leon and the isolated beaches of Almanave is not merely a lack of noise, but a heavy, ancestral presence that has absorbed decades of unanswered questions, becoming a permanent feature of the island's topography. When we revisit the chilling details of the missing young women, we are not simply looking at a collection of cold cases. We are observing a fundamental fracture in the relationship between a community and its landscape. The investigative records, which have remained stagnant and unresolved since the first disappearances were reported, serve as a haunting testament to the limits of human intervention. In this final movement of our narrative, we must grapple with the enduring legacy of the Ho-So-Mo, those open files that represent a collective wound that refuses to scar over, a history where the ending was never written and the victims were never truly laid to rest. The mystery of the West Beach is not something that happened to Tutu'ela. It is something that has become a part of what Tutu'ela is, a narrative woven into the very roots of the rainforest and the salt of the Pacific. The geographic profile of the western coast, with its jagged volcanic outcrops and impenetrable tropical canopy, continues to act as a silent, unyielding guardian of whatever secrets it holds. Even in 2026, with the availability of advanced satellite imaging and sophisticated search drones, the sheer verticality and density of the terrain around Leon and Almanave present an insurmountable challenge to any effort to bring total clarity to the past. The forest floor, shrouded in a perpetual, damp twilight, remains a place where physical evidence is consumed by the rapid cycles of tropical decay and where the earth itself seems designed to hide its contents. The cheat of the disappearances, the absolute cleanliness of the sites, and the total lack of any physical struggle suggest a process of erasure that is fundamentally at odds with the chaotic nature of human violence. This cleanliness is the most disturbing element of the entire saga, as it implies a level of efficiency that feels almost surgical, whether it was the result of a highly calculated human predator or a catastrophic natural accident. The absence of a single torn garment, a dropped shoe, or a broken branch on those narrow trails creates a vacuum of logic that haunts every modern attempt to reconstruct the events. It is a mystery that defies the laws of forensic physics, leaving investigators and families with a void that can only be filled by the heavy, lingering atmosphere of the island itself. The failure of the tracking dogs at the precise, arbitrary points on the trails remains the definitive psychological twist that has prevented the community from ever moving toward a rational conclusion. In the professional history of canine search and rescue, a scent trail typically ends in a way that suggests a trajectory, a move into the brush, a fall into a crevice, or a struggle that disperses scent particles. But on the western trails of Tutu'ela, the dogs consistently reacted as if the invisible thread of human presence had been cleanly severed, as if the young women had simply dissolved into the humid air. This specific detail is what allowed the Trianthiet Duty, of the Tain Saw to take such a firm and permanent hold on the local consciousness. For the people of Leon and Amanave, the supernatural is not a distant or abstract concept. It is a pragmatic framework used to explain a reality that modern science has failed to account for. Believing that a powerful, ancient spirit chose to take a girl into another realm is, for many, a more bearable explanation than the thought of a Kusanwa Jalmat, who could commit such absolute crimes without ever being seen or caught. This cultural synthesis of fear and reverence has turned the missing girls into more than victims. They have become part of the island's spiritual guardianship, their names forever linked to the beauty and the peril of the western shores. The Haukwa, or aftermath of these vanishings, is most visible in the rigid, unspoken protocols that still dictate the movements of the island's youth. The Quitakangam, that forbids women from walking the coastal paths alone at dusk, is a living, breathing form of protection, a communal response to a threat that was never identified. In 2026, this caution has become a fundamental part of the island's social fabric, passed down from one generation to the next not as a story of crime, but as a lesson in respect for the hidden powers of the land. This behavioral shift represents a unique form of result in the absence of a legal one. While there were no trials, no convictions, and no forensic breakthroughs, the community created its own system of justice through vigilance and memory. The missing girls are honored through the safety of those who came after them, their tragic absence serving as a permanent beacon of caution. However, this safety comes at a high psychological cost, as it requires the community to live in a state of perpetual, low-level anxiety, a constant acknowledgement that the familiar landscape they call home contains shadows that are entirely beyond their control. The families of the victims continue to exist in a state of frozen grief, a specific type of mourning that is unique to the families of the missing. Without a body to bury or a grave to visit, the process of psychological closure is perpetually stalled. The open files in the archives are mirrored by the open questions in the homes of Leon, where the passage of decades has not dimmed the memory of the daughters who walked out into the twilight and never came back. In a small, interconnected society like Tutuila, this grief is not an individual burden, but a collective one. Every resident of the western villages carries a piece of this history, a shared understanding that their peace is built on a foundation of unresolved tragedy. This communal weight is what prevents the stories from fading into the background of history. The missing girls are not forgotten because the island does not allow them to be. Their presence is felt in the way the wind whistles through the lava tubes and the way the ocean crashes against the cliffs at dawn. They have become a permanent part of the island's narrative identity, a tragic and beautiful mystery that defines the limits of what can be known. As we conclude this deep-seated exploration of the West Beach vanishings, we are left with a profound sense of the island's indifference to the human need for answers. The Koang Trong between the reality of the missing women and the legends of the Tain Saw is where the true heart of American Samoa resides. It is a place where the modern world and the ancient world exist in a tense, respectful equilibrium. The host So-Emo will likely remain open for another 30 years, not because of a lack of effort, but because the event itself occurred in a liminal space that is inaccessible to the tools of modern investigation. The story of Leon and Amanave is a reminder that even in an age of total information, there are still sacred and terrifying mysteries that belong entirely to the land. The missing girls have been absorbed into the geography, their spirits woven into the lush ferns and the dark volcanic stone. They are the eternal watchers of the western coast, a haunting presence that ensures the stories of the past are never truly silenced. The final image we are left with is one of the Leon coastline as the sun begins to set on this May evening in 2026. The sky is a bruised purple, and the ocean is a deep, churning gray. The trails that wind through the rainforest are once again being swallowed by the encroaching shadows, and the villages are becoming quiet as the residents return to the safety of their homes. Somewhere in those shadows, the memory of the missing girls remains perfectly preserved, untouched by time or the failures of the law. They are a part of the D-Sand of Tutuila, a legacy of beauty, loss, and the enduring power of the unknown. We leave the files open, acknowledging that some endings are not meant to be written in ink, but in the wind, the waves, and the enduring silence of the western shores. The mystery of the missing young women is not a puzzle to be solved, but a truth to be respected, a reminder that on this beautiful island, the light of the sun is only half the story, and the shadows of the West hold secrets that the world may never be allowed to see. The files remain open, the wind continues its long, mournful song, and the girls of the West Beach remain forever a part of the mystery that is Tutuila. In the end, the only result we can offer is the act of remembering, a commitment to ensuring that even if they are never found, they are never truly gone. The silence of the coast is their monument, and the vigilance of the community is their legacy, a story without an end that will be told as long as the Pacific flows against the ancient, unyielding heart of the island. The profound and lingering silence that characterizes the final entries of the investigative logs concerning the missing young women of Tutuila is not merely a record of administrative exhaustion, but a quiet concession to the sheer, unyielding power of the island's western mysteries. As we reach the conclusion of this narrative journey in May 2026, we find that the passage of time has done little to diminish the potency of the fear or the depth of the uncertainty that first took root in Leon and Amanave decades ago. The Ho-So-Mo, those open files, have become a permanent fixture of the local landscape, existing as a metaphorical bridge between the tangible world of forensic evidence and the ethereal realm of island folklore. This final reflection is not an attempt to provide a definitive answer where none exists, but rather an exploration of the enduring spiritual and social equilibrium that the community has established in the face of the absolute unknown. The vanishings of the western coast have transformed from a series of criminal incidents into a fundamental part of the cultural identity of American Samoa, a narrative thread that connects the modern, digital present to an ancient, shadowed past. To stand on the jagged volcanic rocks of the western shore today is to realize that the environment itself has become the ultimate curator of these tragedies. The rainforest that borders the coastal roads is an entity of immense, predatory patience, a vibrant and suffocating wall of green that has reclaimed every footprint and absorbed every echo of the past. The Chi-Teet KY law that so frustrated the original search teams, the clinical cleanliness of the sites, the lack of struggle, and the sudden termination of the scent trails have been absorbed into the mythology of the land. In 2026, the people of Tutuila no longer look for a human perpetrator with the same frantic urgency that defined the early days of the investigation. Instead, they have adopted a perspective of profound, respectful caution, recognizing that the Kusanwa Jalmat might not be a person at all, but a manifestation of the island's own untamable nature. This shift from a criminal investigation to a cultural observance represents the true how qua of the cases. The community has learned to live with a void, filling the emptiness not with forensic facts, but with a complex system of taboos and rituals that ensure the next generation is protected from the same inexplicable fate. The Quitakngam that still governs the movements of the island's youth serves as the most enduring monument to the missing girls. This code of conduct is not written in any law book, yet it carries more authority than any official statute. It is a living memory, a communal reflex that is triggered every time the sun begins its descent toward the Pacific horizon. The caution exercised by the families of Leon is a form of ongoing justice, a way of ensuring that the lives lost were not lost in vain. In the absence of a trial or a verdict, the preservation of the community's safety has become the only acceptable result. The missing young women have become the eternal guardians of this caution, their stories serving as a permanent warning to those who might be tempted to underestimate the power of the Western shadows. This legacy is one of profound resilience. It shows a society that has refused to be broken by a mystery, choosing instead to integrate that mystery into its own survival strategy. We must also confront the Koang Trong, the vast, echoing space between the scientific reality of the modern world and the lived experience of the islanders. In 2026, we are surrounded by technology that promises to illuminate every corner of our existence, yet the western coast of Tutuila remains stubbornly dark. The failure of modern investigative techniques to provide a single clue over 30 years is a humbling reminder of our limitations. It forces us to acknowledge that there are still places where the rules of logic do not apply, and where the Tuc the Tomlin, like the Tain Saw, offer a more coherent explanation than any police report. This is the heart of the Trian Thuyet Duty that surrounds the western beaches. It is not a story told for entertainment, but a narrative developed for survival. The spirits are a way of naming the unnameable, a way of providing a face to a force that can lift a human being off a trail and leave no trace behind. For the families who still wait for news that will never come, these stories provide the only framework that can contain their grief, offering a version of reality where their daughters are not merely gone, but have been taken into a different, more powerful realm. The psychological impact on the families, the Vet Thuong Chua Lan, remains the most tragic element of this history. In a typical true crime narrative, there is a point where the story ends, a funeral, a conviction, a discovery. But for the families of Leon and Amanave, the story is in a state of permanent suspension. They live in a world where the past is always present, where every rustle in the trees or change in the wind could be interpreted as a sign. The Ho-So-Mo status of the cases means that the pursuit of truth is technically ongoing, but in reality, it is a pursuit of ghosts. This state of frozen grief is a heavy burden, but it is also a source of incredible strength. The families have become the keepers of the island's conscience, ensuring that the names of the missing are spoken with respect and that their absence is never treated as a settled fact. Their endurance is a testament to the power of love in the face of total uncertainty, a reminder that a life remains significant even when it leaves no physical trace behind. As we look across the western horizon one final time, we are struck by the beauty of the landscape that has caused so much pain. The cliffs of Leon and the sands of Amanave are spectacular, bathed in the golden light of a setting sun that seems entirely indifferent to the tragedies it has witnessed. This beauty is part of the mystery. It is the lure that drew the young women to the trails and the mask that hides their ultimate fate. The D-San of the missing girls is this duality, the knowledge that the most beautiful places can also be the most dangerous. In 2026, this understanding is the foundation of life on the western coast. The islanders do not fear their home, but they respect it with a depth that outsiders find difficult to comprehend. They know that the land has its own requirements, its own secrets, and its own ways of maintaining balance. The story of the missing girls of the West Beach is a story about the limits of our reach and the depth of our memories. It is a narrative that begins with a footstep on a dirt path and ends in the vast, churning waters of the Pacific. It is a story of folders that will never be closed and questions that will never be answered. But more than that, it is a story of a community that has found a way to carry the light of memory into the deepest shadows. The missing daughters of Tutuila are not lost to history. They are woven into the very fabric of the island, their presence felt in every sunset and every morning mist. They have become the spirits of the coast, a part of the ancient and enduring soul of Samoa. The files remain open on the desks of the authorities, but the truth of their lives is written in the hearts of those who remember them. As we conclude this final chapter, the silence of the western shore remains unbroken. The trade winds continue to blow through the canopy, and the waves continue their eternal assault on the volcanic stone. The mystery remains as vast and as deep as the ocean itself. We leave the western coast of Tutuila with a profound sense of humility, recognizing that some stories are not ours to finish. They belong to the land, to the spirits, and to the families who still watch the twilight with a lingering, hopeful anxiety. The missing girls are a part of the island now, a tragic and beautiful mystery that will remain as long as the sun sets over the West Beach. The Ho-So is open, the trail is empty, but the memory is eternal. We close this account in May 2026, honoring the lives that vanished and the island that kept them, leaving the rest to the silence, the shadows, and the enduring power of the unknown. The narrative ends here, but on the western shores of Tutuila, the story never truly ends. It simply waits for the next twilight, a permanent echo of the girls who walked into the mist and became a part of the island's soul. The ultimate preservation of the mystery surrounding the missing young women of Tutuila lies not in the failure of modern forensics, but in the profound and silent pact between the people and the land they inhabit. As we continue this deep meditation on the events of the Western Coast, now reaching the 11th hour of our historical reconstruction in the midpoint of 2026, we are forced to confront the reality that some narratives are intentionally left unfinished by the universe. The Ho-So-Mo is no longer just a legal classification. It has become a spiritual state of being for the villages of Leon and Amanave. It is a recognition that the truth of what happened on those shadowed trails does not belong to a laboratory or a courtroom, but to the deep, volcanic crevices and the thick, oxygen-rich air of the Samoan rainforest. To walk the western edge of the island today is to feel the weight of this collective suspension, a sense that the atmosphere itself is holding its breath, guarding the specific moments when the physical world diverged into the inexplicable. The legacy of these vanishings is a permanent alteration of the island's vibration, a lingering resonance that informs every interaction between the human residents and the wild, unyielding environment that surrounds them. The physical environment of the Western Coast continues to serve as an impenetrable fortress for the secrets of the past. The dense canopy of the rainforest, characterized by its aggressive growth and its ability to swallow any man-made intrusion within weeks, has ensured that no physical evidence could ever survive the passage of time. The Chi-Tek-Ky law of the disappearances, the surgical precision with which the young women were removed from the physical record, suggests an environmental efficiency that borders on the sentient. In 2026, even with the most advanced thermal imaging and LiDAR technology capable of stripping away the green veil of the forest from a satellite perspective, the earth of Tutuila remains opaque. The hidden lava tubes, those subterranean arteries of ancient volcanic fire, represent a labyrinth that is effectively infinite and entirely inaccessible. They are the silent partners in the island's mystery, providing a logical, yet unprovable, destination for those who vanished. This geological reality creates a profound sense of investigative paralysis that has lasted for generations. It is a reminder that we are merely guests on a landscape that has its own agendas and its own hidden depths, a place where the ground beneath one's feet can be as treacherous as the waves crashing against the cliffs. This environmental defiance is mirrored in the cultural resilience of the Samoan people, who have developed a sophisticated psychological architecture to house their grief and their fear. The Trien Thuyet Duty regarding the Tain Saw is not a primitive attempt to explain the unknown, but a highly evolved method of maintaining a relationship with the missing. By attributing the vanishings to the spiritual guardians of the land, the community transforms a senseless tragedy into a part of a larger, sacred order. This belief system provides a form of closure that the legal system could never offer. It allows the families to believe that their daughters are not lost in the cold, dark sense of the word, but have been integrated into the spiritual fabric of the island. In Leon and Amanave, the missing girls are spoken of with a specific kind of reverence, as if they have become part of the protective force that watches over the West. This cultural synthesis is the true how-qua of the cases. It is the process by which a community heals itself by expanding its definition of reality to include the inexplicable. The Quitakangam, or the unspoken laws of the trail, remain the most functional outcome of this long history of loss. These rules have become a form of ancestral wisdom, a set of instructions for navigating a world that is fundamentally beautiful but inherently dangerous. In 2026, the caution exercised by the youth of Tutuila is not born of a specific memory of the crimes, but of a general, inherited respect for the boundaries of the natural world. The sunset over the western cliffs is a signal for a communal retreat, a moment where the human world yields the stage to the shadows. This ritualized behavior is a testament to the enduring impact of the missing women, whose absence has become a permanent landmark in the social geography of the island. They are the reason for the silence at dusk and the vigilance at dawn. Their stories are told not to frighten, but to prepare, serving as a vital link in the chain of communal survival. The result of the investigation is thus found in the continued safety of the girls who walk the trails today, guided by the invisible hands of those who came before them. Reflecting on the Kusanwa Jalmat theory, we must acknowledge the psychological toll of an unidentified threat. The possibility that a human element was involved in the vanishings creates a unique form of tension in a society as intimate as Tutuila. It introduces the idea that the monster is not a spirit or a geological hazard, but a neighbor, a passerby, or a stranger who moved through the community unnoticed. This theory, while lacking any physical evidence to support it, remains a persistent shadow in the collective mind. It is the reason for the lingering glances and the sudden, protective instincts of parents. The lack of a definitive trial or a suspect has meant that this fear can never be fully exorcised. It remains a dormant possibility, a dark potential that is stored in the Ho-So MO, alongside the forensic reports and the witness statements. This enduring suspicion is the scar tissue of the community, a reminder of the time when the absolute safety of the island was first called into question and found wanting. The families who carry the weight of these open cases exist in a space that defies the traditional boundaries of time. For them, the year 2026 is merely a continuation of the same afternoon when their daughter did not return home. The Vet Thuong Chua Lan is a living thing, a constant presence in the quiet moments of the day. Their grief is not a static object, but a dynamic, evolving relationship with a ghost. In a world that demands rapid processing of trauma and immediate results, the endurance of these families is a powerful act of resistance. They refuse to let the memory of the missing be reduced to a statistic or a cold case file. They keep the names alive, ensuring that the human reality of the victims is never eclipsed by the mystery of their disappearance. Their strength is the bedrock upon which the community's memory is built, a foundation of love that is stronger than the silence of the forest or the depth of the ocean. As we look toward the future of the Western Coast, we are struck by the persistence of the mystery. The Koang Trong between what is known and what is felt is where the true story of Tutuila resides. It is a story that cannot be captured in a 1,600-word analysis or a multi-part podcast series. It is a story that must be lived to be understood. The missing girls of the West Beach have become the atmosphere of the island, the salt in the wind, the dampness in the air, the specific quality of the light as it fades behind the cliffs. They are the reason for the island's unique blend of spectacular beauty and profound melancholy. In 2026, we recognize that the search for facts may have reached a permanent stalemate, but the search for meaning continues in every prayer, every story, and every cautious step taken on the trails of Leon.
The final the soon of the vụ mất tích của các thiếu nữ tại bãi biển phía Tây East Civilizatino that we are the not the master of our envision.
The island of Tutuila remains a sovereign territory of the unknown, a place where the earth and the spirits still hold the final word. The open files in the archives of the police are not a sign of failure, but a sign of respect for a reality that is larger than the human legal system. They are a promise that the girls are not forgotten, even if they cannot be found. They are a testament to a community that has learned to find beauty in the mystery and strength in the silence. As the sun sets on this Friday in May, the shadows once again reclaim the western trails, and the memory of the missing young women is once again renewed. They remain the eternal daughters of the West, forever young, forever moving through the twilight, forever a part of the profound and beautiful mystery that is American Samoa. The story remains open, the wind remains constant, and the truth remains hidden in the heart of the island, where it will stay as long as the Pacific flows and the rainforest grows, a permanent echo of those who stepped into the dark and became a part of the landscape forever. The legacy of the missing is ultimately one of connection, a connection between the living and the lost, between the past and the present, and between the human heart and the untamable wild. It is a narrative that challenges us to look deeper into the shadows of our own world and to acknowledge the mysteries that we can never hope to solve. The girls of Tutuila are the silent teachers of this humility, their absence a powerful lesson in the fragility of our existence. As we conclude this segment of our investigation, we leave the Ho-So MO on the table of history, a silent invitation to remember, to respect, and to wonder. The western coast of Tutuila continues to roar with the sound of the ocean, a sound that is both a requiem for the lost and a lullaby for the living, a sound that will continue long after the files have turned to dust, carrying the names of the missing into the vast, eternal reaches of the South Pacific. We stand at the edge of the cliffs, looking out over the water, and we understand that in the end, the mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a sacred part of the island's journey, a story that is still being written in the shadows and the spray, forever and always, without end.